Okay, we're live. Hi, guys. Welcome to Polyglot Principles. My name is Modja, and this is the channel where I help ambitious language learners go from intermediate to advanced in their target language. And I speak 8 languages myself. I speak 4 of those at an advanced level. And every Monday at 8 a.m. Central African time, I publish a video, and the video is specifically designed to help you go from intermediate to advanced in your target language. So today, usually I make videos alone, but today I'm doing an interview with Señora Susana, and she is a yeah, she is a teacher, a language teacher, and she teaches Spanish to kids, and she's also a YouTuber, and she's the host of Reading in Spanish with Señora Susana. So I'll put the link to all of that in the description. But yeah, Susana, I'm very happy to have you on the show. Welcome. Welcome to Polyglot Principles.
Thank you. Thank you, Modja. It's nice to be here with you.
Yeah, very good. So I guess in order the community needs to learn about you a little bit. So we're going to start with questions about where you're from and where you're living now and
Sure.
where you're from originally.
Okay. It's not too hard to answer that question. I'm from Peru, from Lima, Peru. That's where I was born and raised most of my life. When I was 8, my family moved to the United States, and we lived in the United States for 3 years. That's where I learned to speak English. Obviously, until then, my only language was Spanish. When I became an adult, then I had different opportunities living in different countries. For example, right now I am based in South Africa, and when I've lived in different countries, I tried as much as I can to learn the local language. So the countries that I've lived in mostly have been English speaking or Spanish speaking. But the first country that I encountered where I didn't speak the language at all was Romania. I lived there for 5 years, and I've been in South Africa for 2 years now. So before South Africa, I was living in Romania, in Bucharest. So I started learning Romanian there. Now that I'm here in South Africa has 12 official languages. And I really wanted to choose one of the more native languages, like Zulu, for example, which is widely spoken here. However, because I am self-teaching, I couldn't find a lot of Zulu resources, unfortunately. So the language that I had, that I found resources for, is Afrikaans. And that's what I've started learning now. And I can practice it at work as well with some of the colleagues that I have at work that speak it.
Oh, that's cool. Because so I did 2 years of high school. I did them in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and
cool.
Right. So you're right. That's right. They have 12 languages, and they have a language. I think it's called Hosa or something, and it's a language which they speak with clicks in the throat. Have you tried those?
Yes. Yeah. I have not. I've seen some videos on YouTube, but I'm like, okay, no, those clicks are hard.
Yeah, that's wow. Because
But
we had
I'd
a class.
love to learn that language. I would love to learn that language, but like I said, languages, including Romanian, it's hard to find resources online.
Yes. Yeah, there's certain languages that people like to learn a lot, like Spanish. Overwhelming number of resources.
Yes.
German, English, and so on. Yes, and other languages, not so many people are trying to learn them. So I guess, like in the case of what you're talking about, Zulu in South Africa, maybe the best resource would be actual Zulu speakers, and then meet up with them regularly.
Right.
Perhaps that might work.
Yeah. But I do like, and maybe this is why I have that approach of teaching a language through reading. At least initially, I like to tackle the language on my own, until I have certain level, and then I'll go out and venture and try to speak or have a conversation. But until I get that level, I kind of need my own time to figure it out, to just gain some confidence in the language. But for me, at least personally, of course, starting just with speaking with a person that may or may not be a language teacher, most likely not.
Yeah.
That I don't find that very motivating usually.
Is it
So I
scary?
try to not scary. It's just a bit difficult, I guess, because I in one of your videos you mentioned how native speakers are not the best teachers, and I agree, not because they're native speakers, but just because they're not teachers. So they don't have the training and the understanding perhaps of how difficult it is to put yourself on that vulnerable spot of learning a different language than the one you speak, and wanting to express yourself, but you can't, especially as a beginner. So I have had several interactions with, for example, native Afrikaans, and it's just a little bit discouraging, I guess, you know, when they focus a lot on the way you're pronouncing words, or they keep correcting you, and that's, I don't find that motivating. So until I have a certain level and a certain confidence, then I most likely won't start with speaking.
Yeah, this is some really cool stuff, because on the channel on Polyglot Principles, uh, so like I differentiate between principles and methods. So did we get disconnected? Okay, you're still there. Cool. Yeah. So
Yeah, you're there, but you froze up a bit.
yeah. Okay. You too. All right. Yeah. So on Polyglot Principles, I usually try to differentiate between principles and methods. So principles is just how things work, and methods is just application of those principles. So for example, should you start at the beginning of a language? Should you start by just output immediately, doing output, just start talking? That's just a method. It also works. There's people whose primary method is that, and it works. And
yeah,
there's also another method, which is what you're talking about, is hey, I'm not going to start by speaking or having interacted with natives. I'm going to do maybe more input, work on my own. And then when I build enough confidence, then I'll start. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's, again, it's highly personal, right? Because I think everyone has their own way of tackling a certain task, and language learning is one of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, this is correct. So methods have to be highly personal. This is also another really interesting concept. Usually, for example, if you look at motivational speakers, some of them really love pain. To some point, they've become some sort of sadists. They just enjoy pain. So they tell you learning has to be uncomfortable, right? You have to make, right? If it's not painful, if you're having fun, something's wrong. You gotta make it painful. So I don't know if you've heard this idea before, but it's a pretty popular idea. And what you're mentioning about
I
method,
have.
yeah.
Well, I agree to a degree. It is true that you have to step out of your comfort zone, and that's when most of the learning happens, when you are putting yourself out there and trying new things that you're not certain if they'll work or not. But that can be really fun. It doesn't have to be painful. It can just be like, okay, here I go, you know, and
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That makes sense. I also think it doesn't have to be painful. Language learning can be fun, and you can learn a language to a high level. And I'm case in point.
yeah.
I've learned a couple of languages to a high level, and it's been a fun process. It didn't have to be painful. You don't have to be crying or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So tell me, what were you doing in Bucharest? In where is that? Romania, right?
Yeah. Well, most of my adult life, my main job, my main career has been being a teacher, and I'm on this particular line of teaching called international teaching. So I work at international schools that exist all over the world. And depending on what needs they have, they will hire me to be a certain teacher. So in Romania, I wasn't teaching Spanish. I started teaching math because that's one of the other subjects that I teach as well. I started teaching math, and then I transitioned into teaching English as an additional language. So giving support to students that came to the school. The school's curriculum is delivered entirely in English, but we had students that would arrive at the school whose English level wasn't very advanced. And therefore, before they could be successful in subjects like math or science, they needed a bit more immersion in English. So they had extra English classes, and that's when I came in with English, more English reinforcement, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what led me to be working in Bucharest and Romania.
So how long did you do that? Teaching in Romania?
In Romania, I was for 5 years teaching math and English.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And it's always kids of around the same age group. Because I think before you mentioned that the kids you teach usually between the age groups of 11 and 14, around there. Was that the same in Romania as it is right now in South Africa?
Pretty much. In Romania, I also taught high school, which is a little bit more older students. So I think my oldest student there was 17, 18 tops. But usually I do tend to give lessons on whatever subject I happen to be teaching to older students, meaning from 11 years higher.
Mm-hmm. So, I actually haven't asked you, what languages do you speak? So I know you speak English and Spanish, all of them really well, because Spanish native and basically an English native also.
And I recognize that is such a huge advantage. And that's one of the things that I would love to share it. You know, I would love to have everyone have this gift that I was given in my case by my parents, because I had the opportunity as a kid to live in the States, which at a perfect age, right? I was 8, so my language and my learning of Spanish was already solidified. And that gave me the necessary tools to add on another language pretty seamlessly. I think when you start learning another language in an immersion style, which I was exposed to when I moved to the States, it's very advantageous because you can easily learn a second language. It's like your brain is prepared for it. And just by knowing those 2 languages, I have many doors open in terms of communication and employment opportunities, etc.
Of course, especially
the other language that I kind of speak okay-ish.
Yeah?
Yeah, it really helps. English and Spanish are so widely spoken. Besides that, I lived in Mozambique for 4 years. So when I was living there, naturally, I practiced a lot of Portuguese because that's one of the official languages in Mozambique. And it's very similar to Spanish. So it wasn't very difficult for me. And that was kind of difficult, actually. What made it difficult, it was so close to Spanish that my motivation to learn it was not really there, because I didn't feel like I really needed to learn Portuguese, since it was so similar to Spanish. I could just get away with speaking Portuñol, so a mix of Portuguese and Spanish, and people would understand. So that made me a little lazy. I didn't learn it as well as I could have, but I can understand it and I can speak it okay, maybe intermediate. And then when I moved to Romania, I started learning, and it got pretty good a little bit in Romanian as well. And now I'm learning Afrikaans, but Afrikaans, I'm a complete novice. It's a very different language. It's more similar to English and to Spanish. And I just know like a few canned phrases that I can use every once in a while, but that's about it.
Wait, let's first go back to your Portuguese and Spanish. So this is an important topic that, most of my listeners are people who are advanced at learning a language, and they're trying to push it in the final stages. So from intermediate to advanced kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
final details of a language. Uh, Now, one of the things that happens, and a couple of guys speak multiple languages, right? Like you, for example, speak
Okay.
multiple languages. And part of what, oh, sorry, just a moment. Okay, sorry. Yeah, got a problem. All right. So, oh, it's okay. Just some interruption. Okay. Uh,
No worries.
yeah. So we usually, one of the things that happens is we have mixture of languages, and that happens a lot if you speak multiple languages. In particular, if the languages you speak are very similar to each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in this particular case with Spanish and Portuguese, did you experience any mixing of the languages?
I think that mixing is very common when the two languages that you're mixing, there isn't one that you are solid on. But
So,
I'm
sorry,
pretty
just give me
solid
a
in my
moment.
Spanish since it's
Sorry,
my
one
first.
moment. One moment.
Yeah, it's fine.
Ok, mais. Ne me dérange pas, j'ai quelque chose ici. All right, sorry. You try to keep quiet, but
What
sometimes you get
language?
interrupted.
What language were you speaking right there? French?
Yes.
Okay, because the word for bother in Romanian is something like déranger.
Yeah, déranger in French, to disturb.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So I've noticed that I mix up the languages, not when one of them is solid. For example, I don't mix anything up with Spanish because Spanish is already such a solid language for me as a native speaker. But one thing that I've noticed here, for example, is when I started learning Afrikaans, my Portuguese got in the way. I had some language interference with Portuguese and with Romanian. Sorry, not with Afrikaans, with Portuguese and with Romanian, because here in South Africa, naturally I encounter lots of people that are from Mozambique that work here, especially in grocery stores. So, just to be friendlier and to practice my Portuguese, I would try to speak Portuguese with the workers there. And as I was speaking Portuguese, my Romanian would come in and I would start saying phrases in Romanian. So, and it was so interesting to see my brain like getting mixed up with these two languages. And I think the reason is because neither of them is solid enough for me to be able to English in that case, because both of those languages I'm pretty fluent at, and I feel pretty comfortable at.
Wait, so yeah, I'm trying to catch your reason again. Your reason for uh, why you think you are mixing up Romanian and Portuguese, but you didn't mix up other languages. You didn't mix up Spanish and other languages. Right.
Yeah, my reasoning is because my Spanish is quite solid. I'm a native Spanish speaker. I also feel very comfortable in my English because I learned it from a young age. So those two languages are ingrained, I guess, or stored in a part of my brain that is almost locked. But for Romanian and Portuguese, which I'm kind of not there yet, they get mixed up sometimes.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, this is actually something
Does that happen to you too?
Oh, yeah, of course it happens to me. So, yeah, what happens is sometimes if I spend a long time without speaking one language, for example, I spent a long time without speaking Spanish, maybe close to a year with very little Spanish being spoken.
Okay.
So I speak Spanish at an advanced level, but yeah, I hadn't spoken it for a while. And then I got this chess coach from Cuba, and the guy, he's only able to do classes in Spanish. So I had to work with him in Spanish. And I mean, before I selected him as my coach, I had to interview him, and I could only do it in Spanish. And what I noticed was every time I talked to him, his my other, especially German, because I've been learning German for 8 months. So my German will just come and interfere. Hello, are you still there? Hello. Yep. All right, guys, we're back. Yeah, got disconnected. Technology problems. Yeah, so you had asked me a question about whether I experience interference when learning a language. Yep, and it does happen to me a lot, especially if there's a particular language I haven't used for a long time. So, for example,
Yeah.
when I was learning Spanish in college, uh, I hadn't spoken Spanish before, and I had been in the States for a while, so I'd spent a long time without using Swahili. Right? Kiswahili is one of our languages here. So every time when I would try to speak in Spanish, I'd find myself using Kiswahili words in Spanish. Speak like yes, yes. And actually, I made a video with my own theories about why I think mixing up of languages happens. Yeah, yeah. The way I was thinking of it was like more of like a muscle. It's kind of like a muscle of discrimination. That's basically. Let's say I'm trying to speak English. Let's say I'm trying to say something in English, and I know many languages. For example, I'm trying to say I. I'd say I, Joe, Nze, whatever languages I speak. So if I try to express that thought, all those are valid options as far as the brain is concerned.
Right.
And then for the brain doesn't really care which one you use. You've expressed the thought. But you're the one who decides, because the brain's job is to unify information, not separate it. But you decide, no, I want to say it only in Spanish. So you have to exercise a muscle of discrimination that throws away all other words and sticks with only the words in the language that you select. And yeah, the more you work on the muscle, the less mixing happens. And if there is no muscle built,
becomes more automatic, I guess.
Yes, it becomes automatic. Yes. You basically, your brain wants to connect information. You have to train it to separate information.
Yeah, that's very true. Until it becomes automatic, then it's easy to get mixed up.
Oh yeah, it's easy. It's easy to get. It's very easy to get mixed up. But typically, it can be solved quickly because I was working with somebody, and that's what happened. He was teaching me German. I was teaching him English. And he speaks both languages at a high level. He was mixing them up, but we talked every day. And after a while, it rarely happens that he mixes up the languages because the brain got accustomed to separating English.
Right, you're right. The times that I've experienced that interference as well have been in isolated situations where it was just a one-off that I had to speak Portuguese for a bit and somehow my Romanian came out. But I'm sure that if I continued practicing, then the more I practice, the less interference because it becomes more automatic, like we were mentioning.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So let's talk a bit about your channel. So reading in Spanish with Señora Susana. When did you start the channel? Why did you start it? And so on. But let's start with
well, thank you for asking me about that. Yeah. It started, lockdown. We, as the whole world, went into lockdown because of COVID-19. So our school stopped working in March. And so it was kind of, it was a challenge for a lot of us teachers, also for the students, for everyone in general, because we wanted to continue giving education to students and being there for them and trying to teach as much as possible. But now we were limited in our interactions. We couldn't do it in person. Luckily, our school is a private school. It has lots of resources. All the students have laptops. All the students have Wi-Fi at home, same as the teachers. So in that sense, we were very fortunate that we had the technology to be able to continue the lessons online. It was still challenging because a lot of the teachers had to learn how to migrate all of their materials into an online platform, which is not easy, especially if you've been teaching for many years, not using so many of the online tools. So anyway, because of that, I noticed that a lot of the things that I say and a lot of the things that I teach were very repetitive, as it happens with a lot of the content of teaching. It becomes repetitive. So I thought, well, you know what? I could put this in videos, and perhaps they could come handy in the future. I was also thinking of some of my students that needed a little bit more reinforcement in certain aspects. We also get students that are new and they come in the middle of the year. We had several students that were new in January, for example, and so they had only been in school for 2 months, and then the lockdown hit. Anyway, just because our population is very dynamic, and just because I found myself saying the same things over again, and teaching reading is very repetitive in the sense that it's the way I teach it, at least. I go through certain stages of learning the sounds of the alphabet, for example. So I thought of making these videos initially for my own students, thinking of some of them that needed some repetition and some reinforcement to get that skill down. But then I also thought of myself of how to make my work be more effective, so that instead of repeating myself, I could have these videos and perhaps use them in a future opportunity. And then I said, well, you know what, if I have this material, why not just make it public and put a YouTube channel, and maybe other people can benefit from it. I think I had mentioned to you before how when I was learning Romanian, that was kind of a breakthrough for me. And I actually, not mentioned it to you, but I mentioned it in one of my videos that you told me that you had watched, how when I finally knew how the letters of the alphabet sounded in Romanian, and that's one of the advantages of the Romanian language, is that it's very transparent, just like Spanish. The letters of the sounds, the sounds of the letters tend to be the same throughout, unlike English or French. So once I had the pronunciation down of the Romanian alphabet, I felt confident to read text. I had no idea what the text meant initially, but I could read it, I could hear myself, I knew that the pronunciation was there. And then just by reading out loud to myself or to other people that knew Romanian, I started picking up on some of the grammar aspects of it, the conjugation, some of the frequent words. So I thought that was really helpful. That really, for me, I felt empowered. I could take this language on my own. I could find books, usually children's books that come with illustrations to help the comprehension and to help that input. So there's a huge satisfaction in being able to take a text and try to decipher it. It's like an investigation, like being a detective and trying to figure out what it says. And
I understand what you mean. Yeah.
And with the technology that's available as well, you can get that immediate feedback of knowing if what you think the text says is actually what the text says. You could use Google Translate, for example, and you type the words in Romanian or whatever language you're learning, and then you're like, okay, this is what I think it says. Let me check. And right away, you have that feedback of knowing if what you thought is correct or not. And that also helped me a lot in language learning. The other method that I used for myself was, because I love music, singing, so just listening to songs, but again, going through the lyrics and learning some phrases, and some of the phrases that I would learn would be kind of funny, so I could use them and with my Romanian friends and just come up with cheesy phrases that I took from a song, and they'd be like, wow, where'd you learn that phrase? So it was also cool to be able to use the phrases that I learned through song or through reading and use them in context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So that's part of the thing that was intriguing when I looked at the channel is, you focus on reading as the method. At least, you're preferring reading as a way to learn language. So there's, for example, YouTubers who talk about speaking as a way to learn, which is, of course, powerful method. Listening,
definitely,
another powerful method. Writing through experience, also powerful. And people don't tend to focus on reading a lot. Why are you focusing on it, reading specifically?
Well, if you think about it, especially when you read out loud, reading out loud is a way of speaking, except that you have a script. So
Yes.
that really helps. And my particular students, most of them are not advanced. I do have some native speakers in my class, but most of the students that I have, because of the age level, you know, they're not that advanced. So, and particularly middle school, you know, that age, they're feeling a little bit vulnerable. They're starting to, their bodies are changing. They have all these hormones. So my main concern, or I want them to like the language. I want them to have fun with it. And I want my students to feel that they can do it. So if I started drilling them with grammar and conjugation tables, that would take all the fun out of the language. And they would feel that they're not good at Spanish, because particularly with Spanish, the conjugation can be a nightmare. So instead of going through the grammar aspect, which can be very, very laborious and intricate, I'd rather approach it with more fun things like songs, like reading. And especially in Spanish, it works because of the transparency of the language. Everybody can read in Spanish. If you can read in Spanish, then you have the confidence of knowing that your pronunciation is clear, that you speak it well.
Yes, yes.
And you can practice and hearing yourself is a great way to also build that confidence, especially for my students. They know that they sound good because they hear it from me, they hear it from their parents when they read to their parents at home, and the parents are like, wow, you sound really good. So that's my main thing for learning I see it as a gateway into finding joy for the language and building the confidence to continue the language learning process,
Yeah.
which we know that when you get into the advanced stages becomes a bit more complicated.
What becomes more complicated at the advanced stages?
Well, the whole fine tuning, you know, because you can get your message across, but you might sound a little bit strange, or, you know, maybe your grammar is a little bit off. But if you really want to polish your grammar and sound really well, you know, fluent, then that fine tuning, that polishing takes a lot of work. And then is when you'll need to practice more conversation, be more open to getting correcting yourself. My focus with my students is not that. My focus with my students is for them to feel capable and to know that Spanish, or any language learning for that case, can be quite fun.
Okay. Yeah, so right, because you mentioned something about building confidence. That makes sense because, okay, so some people find it easy to talk, right? So these usually are referred to as extroverts, easy to talk.
Yeah.
It's actually funny the way the world is divided. There's some people for whom it is easier to talk than to shut up. And for other people, it is easier to shut up than to talk, right? Yes, and so these are things usually called the introverts. And so one thing, maybe if someone is struggling, it seems like if someone is struggling with a language, they don't know how to speak, maybe they're just not confident in speaking, and maybe the more introverted type, maybe that could also be a way by just reading out loud, because there's no pressure from people and they can still practice their speaking.
They can't get it wrong because the text is there, so the grammar is not going to be a problem.
Yes. So sometimes if you read, sometimes there are certain things when we are reading or speaking that we think sound correct, when in fact they don't. So how does someone, let's say using a reading method, handle those kinds of cases?
Well, I think that's why it's really important that the reading be done out loud. So, for example, if you want to practice this with a very popular program like Duolingo, before the Duolingo, or you can put your computer on mute, you can say the phrase that you see on the screen and then listen to it to check your pronunciation against the pronunciation that the computer is telling you. So thankfully now we have lots of tools available like that we can use to check ourselves.
That's right. So the computer is also, yes, a powerful tool, absolutely. A lot of the pronunciation is right, and sometimes it also gets pronunciation wrong. No, like, have you ever tried to read an
Yeah,
audiobook from a computer? It sounds just not
sounds a bit
human. It's,
robotic.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, uh, so let's say, how does somebody, let's say, using a reading method, get to the point where they are also pronouncing things naturally? Because, for example, I might not be qualified enough to check my own pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. It's always easier, of course, if you have somebody to help you, right?
Mhm.
And in this case, my students and I have each other. So in class, whenever we have Spanish class, reading out loud is part of our daily routine. We read out loud as a class, or we read out loud in partners.
Mhm.
So today, for example, we read as a class where I have a text projected on the TV, and we all take turns reading. And at times we go over the words, correcting pronunciation, etc. Other times the reading will be done in partners. So maybe, for example, you and I will be paired up. So the two of us have a text and we take turns reading it out loud to each other, sentence by sentence. So in that way, and we talk a lot about respect and kindness, you know, not making fun of people for the pronunciation, but rather saying, well, I think this word might be pronounced this way. What do you think? Or, you know, here's an a, it's not an e. So, and if the students are not sure, then I'm around, walking around their reading to check or to corroborate or to just confirm if some of them have difficulties in the pronunciation. But the good thing about Spanish is once you learn the sounds of the alphabet, knowing the pronunciation is pretty straightforward.
Yes.
Unless you want to get into the more nitty gritty, like, you know, where the stress syllables are. For example, teléfono, it's not telefono, you
Yeah.
know, but
Telefono.
that's a little
Numero.
bit more. I mean, as long as you're saying teléfono and not teléfono, you know, then
Well, actually,
then
you
it's
know,
okay.
Americans like. I mean, when I was in college, I took some Spanish classes, and there were like a bunch of Americans in the class because it was in the U.S. And they tended to not pay any attention to pronunciation, and also,
Yeah, and
yeah, and they, I mean, like one of the philosophies and among the professors, some professors had the philosophy that our pronunciation is not so important. Let us just learn grammar, learn vocabulary, and then the pronunciation will work on at a later stage. The pronunciation comes afterwards. What's your view? Is it the foundation or should it come after?
well, I think that different teachers have different ways of of teaching, right? The way that I like teaching is that we tackle pronunciation from day one. So I've had students that come in and say things like teléfono, and we talk about how in Spanish the vowels are very short. You don't say a, you say e,
Eh,
you say o, a, you know? So pretty soon they have it down. And when they hear themselves sounding so well, that just makes them more motivated to keep learning. So tackling the pronunciation at the beginning, in my experience, has helped my students want to continue doing better because they hear themselves and they like how they sound. And then because they're middle schoolers, they also, sometimes when they go on YouTube and they hear people that haven't practiced their pronunciation, they're like, oh man, check that guy out, how he's pronouncing this word. That's not how you say it, you know?
mm,
So it gives them a little sense of pride to know that they can pronounce the words correctly, even though it could be an aesthetics thing, you know. However, one could argue that correct pronunciation can help communication, and if your pronunciation has a really heavy accent, it could hinder it. So I love accents. Sometimes I wish I had more of a Latin accent, um, but it it could hinder pronunciation if your accent is pretty thick, you know, and it could distract from the message that you're giving. So in a language like Spanish, where pronunciation is quite easy, then I think anyone that wants to access the correct pronunciation of Spanish can. And that's why I created as well, one of the reasons why I created my YouTube channel, to give people the option of being able to pronounce the words correctly if they wanted to.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I think I agree with what you're saying there. And I think actually, I think of it as a mistake to learn pronunciation later. It's like, there's like different methods and then maybe some approaches. There's many correct methods and there's also many wrong methods. I mean, I tend to lean on the side that it's actually incorrect to do pronunciation later because it's the foundation of speaking and listening too, and reading. Okay, yeah, definitely reading, right? So, um, and also writing, because if you're writing something, usually you're also reading out loud in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you going to read out loud if, okay, maybe you can, but still, it's, I mean, just from the way I think of it is the principle is to start with the foundation and then build on that and then
Mm-hmm.
build on that. And
Right.
sound is the foundation of language. What do
It
you,
is. I agree. And like I said before, it's a great way to enter the language, to be able to say, you know what, I don't speak Spanish that well yet. I don't really understand it too much, but I can read it so nicely. You know, that there's certain power in being able to say that.
yes.
And if you practice reading, eventually your brain starts picking up on those grammatical patterns, those high frequency verbs or words, I mean. And and then if you want to take it a bit further, you could say, well, I keep coming across this word. What does it mean? How is it used? And then you can take it from there and continue with learning at your own pace.
So what if somebody, in my view, has made the mistake of, let's say, just progressing with the language and not paying attention to the pronunciation, and now they're intermediate to advanced, they're really good at the language, but their pronunciation sucks. So most of the time they say stuff, people are like, what did you say? And so on. So how does someone like that now is it possible for them at that stage to pick up, to learn correct pronunciation? Or is it too late because they've internalized too many bad habits in pronunciation?
Well, I'm a teacher, right? So I'm going to say, and I believe that
It's impossible.
it's never too late. It's never too late. You can always, as long as there's the will, if there's a will, there's a way. So if you're like, oh man, my pronunciation is terrible, I need to polish it up. Great. If you want to, you can. It just takes practice and will. That's it.
So how does one practice pronunciation? Because, many people, just a moment, many people believe that once you're an adult, you really can't have very good pronunciation. It's too late. So
yeah,
how does one practice, let's say, pronunciation as adult or after, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, there are certain sounds that once your brain is past that stage, you are no longer able to make. You know, we were talking about osa, or however you pronounce that, the clicking language. I can't do the clicks, and as much as I try and I practice, I may not ever be able to do them as a native Kosa speaker. Mm-hmm. Or French is the same way. There's some nasal sounds and very, like, I don't know, I'm not familiar with French, but I know that the pronunciation in French is difficult. Same in English. Had I learned English as an adult, I would not have as clear pronunciation as I do now. I would speak it with a more Latin or Spanish speaking accent. And I'm not saying those are bad. I love those accents. But what I'm saying is that there are certain sounds that you can teach yourself. For example, instead of saying a, you can learn to say ah. That is just a way of forming the mouth, and it's accessible at least to English speakers.
Yeah.
Other sounds are more complicated, right? Like rolling the R's, saying perro. Right. That one, I know that if you haven't learned that one from a younger age, you might not ever be able to do it in a way that sounds, okay for you. But that's more of a fine tuning. What I say is accessible to all is pronunciation that sounds pretty okay without straining or without, you know, working too hard. Saying the shortening up the vowels, for example, not making common mistakes like the word double L-A-M-A. A lot of English speakers will say llama.
Yeah, Yama.
Because they don't know that the double L has a Y sound. So that's Yama, you know, or saying names that are, for example, the name Selena. Selena, that's how you say it in English. But in Spanish, if you read that name, it's Selena.
Oh.
So you could, knowing that difference, it is accessible. Maybe it's not so easy for everyone, but if you take the time to learn, especially the vowels, knowing that the E does not sound E, it always sounds E in Spanish. Then if you take the time to know that, you could teach yourself how to sound a little bit better in Spanish, if that is one of your objectives. Obviously, if you don't care how you sound, then that wouldn't be a priority.
Oh, okay. Well, my guys care how they sound, the people in the community, because it's specifically for people who want to get to the highest level possible, not happy with just getting by. So for them, yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. For us, it really matters doing things properly. So, but how does one practice pronunciation? Like, do you have a specific method you use, let's say, with your students, so that you get a student who couldn't pronounce stuff, and then after they follow this method, now they're pronouncing really well? Is there a process to this?
Because normally it's not that they can't pronounce, it's just that they are unaware of the sounds.
Okay.
So if they see S-E, they might say C when they should be saying se, you know? So, or the word idea, you know, the word idea in English, if you say that word in Spanish, it's idea. And that's quite confusing because the I sounds like the E and the E sounds like the I, and but once you have that clear, then you can say idea instead of idea. Another common mistake that my students make is to read the word United States, for example. Okay, let's say that I'm reading United in Spanish. So they will say united. They say you instead of u. So it's just for the most part, my students' pronunciation is good. They just need to practice it a little bit because they keep kind of going back to how they pronounce the words in English.
Yes.
So that's why we practice it every day. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. So sometimes there's certain patterns that one has. That's correct. So for example, instead of saying señor, someone keeps saying señor, something like this. So
yeah.
Right. And maybe they've been saying it for a long time as señor. So they've developed a pattern, a habit of saying it wrong. So how can we get someone, let's say, who's been saying señor, let's say, he's been saying señor for 1 year, all right? Señor, señor, señor. Okay. And then all of a sudden he learns, oh no, you never say señor. It's supposed to be señor. Once that happens, how can we help him to change that? Because his bad habit is going to keep creeping in.
That's another area where I think reading comes in handy, because when you have that visual cue of seeing it spelled S-E, not S-I, then that can remind you that S-E, you have to say E. It's not an I, so it's not pronounced E, it's pronounced E. So that's why I believe that having that visual of having the text in front of you will help you tremendously when the text is removed and you no longer have a script to follow. You have the pronunciation.
Because you can also see the text in your mind, can't you? Later on.
Yeah.
Like it's not señor, it's not señor, it's señor. You could probably in your mind see SE or something.
Right.
Actually, those things are very linked, like speaking and reading are very linked. So that
I think so too, especially if you're reading out loud. You're just hearing yourself.
Actually, if you're speaking out loud, I'm a big proponent of reading out loud. I do that, like I always do that, actually. Yes. So, you know, when you learn a language, there are certain things that you do, correct things that you do automatically. And there's also a lot of incorrect things you do automatically. So one of the things I did automatically without knowing why it works was when I started learning languages seriously, I used to read out loud. It's only later after thinking I realized the power of it, but I automatically did it. The point is, it's a really powerful method because you're basically training everything. You're training your reading ability, except for writing. That's the, oh, are you still there? Hello? Oh, you're
Hello,
back.
can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
I can see you.
you were frozen. You
Yeah,
were frozen
you.
in a really funny face.
Okay. Well, now I've forgotten. What were we? Where were we?
You were saying how reading is a very powerful way of learning a language.
Reading out loud, especially, yes, because you're
Yeah.
practicing almost every skill. You're practicing listening, you're practicing speaking, and also you're practicing
Speaking.
reading. The only thing you're not practicing is
Yeah.
writing, but typically, if you know how to write, eventually and you practice speaking, your improved speaking also influences your writing, actually.
Yeah. There's another routine that that we do in my classroom that involves writing, but it kind of comes back to letter sound correspondence as well. And it's a routine that I call Today in History.
Okay.
And we do it at the beginning of each class with all of my grade levels. The students walk in and they write in their notebook, Hoy en la historia, today in history. And then they hear me saying a sentence to them about something that happened today in history. So today, for example, in 1950 was the first time that a Mexican channel broadcasted to the public. So when they come in, and it's an interesting piece of information, you know, useless knowledge, but
Hey, it's
whatever.
useful.
So
Why is it useless?
they come in and I say, okay, hoy. So they have to write down in their notebook, hoy. And by now they've written it enough to know that hoy is spelled with an H in the
Yeah.
front, right? H-O-W. Sorry, H-O-Y.
Why?
Maybe the first time they spelled it O-I, but it always starts with hoy. So
Yeah.
they know that hoy en 1950, and they have to write down the date, you know, and that's another practice as well, because now, after having done this for a couple of years, my students are so good at dates. They can say the dates without hesitation because they've learned the pattern, since it's something that we do every day. And sometimes the numbers are not that easy, you know?
Oh no, yeah, the numbers
So
are not,
that,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
so even though that's the only writing we do regularly in class, is just writing down what they hear. We do have other writing
Oh, that's like
exercises,
dictation.
but yeah, it's exactly that. It's dictation, but it's also training of the ear so that they can become better at pronouncing the words. It all comes down to being able to pronounce correctly, confidently.
Yeah. That makes, right. So what you're talking about here is, let's say a kid walks into the class and they don't know how to write oi. They don't know that it's pronounced as
Yeah,
H-O-Y. They don't know that. And
right.
you're saying that because after a while of doing this, they eventually figure out how to say it. So one of the things that
Yeah.
seems to be behind, let's say, they're learning how to write the word well, is the fact that they're repeating.
Yes,
They're doing
repetition is important.
repetition, yes. So
Right.
how important is repetition, and what's the value of it in language learning? Well, let's say with your students at least.
Well, we've talked about when something becomes automatic, and it becomes automatic because you do it so many times. So I think repetition is key for automaticity. If you don't have repetition, how could something become automatic? it would be very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, for humans at least, yeah. Uh, yeah, a computer can repeat the same thing uh, correctly after hearing it once. But
Yeah,
yes,
true.
humans don't work that way. It's good that you bring up
Hmm.
automation, because that's also a key principle we talk about at Polyglot Principles, which is automation is what allows you to use the language. For example, automation of grammar. Uh, if
Hmm.
grammar
Yeah,
becomes automatic, only then are you free to think about other sorts of nuances. Otherwise, you
of
always have to be
course.
worrying about grammar, let's say.
You have to picture the table, the conjugation table in your head, and find the words that you want, and only then you can say them. And by that time, your speaker's already forgotten about what you were trying to say in the first place.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It doesn't. Yes. Sorry, just give me a moment. Dama Ningo, nazo sala interview awa, s'il vous plaît. Soki mgongo izama kasi mingi bazoyo kangoko to. Okay. Noisy relative. So yeah, I live in Congo, and it's a bit different from, let's say, America, because here people live a lot in a community kind of setting. So
Hmm.
you don't live. It's rare to find someone living in a house alone. It's like I'm here with my aunties and the maid and so many
Yeah.
people. Yes, and you tell them, "Hey, I got a recording. Please be silent." It's impossible. So
Right. They'll be silent for a bit, but then they'll forget.
oh, they'll forget. Yeah, it's really a natural
Yeah.
to just be quiet. You know.
Yes. Yes. Of course.
Yeah. Teachers tried to do that to us in school. Never worked. Be quiet. Stop talking. Uh, right. So I do have a question for you about. So you work with students. I want us to dig into the mindset, the right mindset when it comes to learning a language, and I think the mindset will be the same for learning anything. So among your students, I'm
Yeah.
guessing some of them pick up what you teach them really quickly, and others
Hmm.
not so. What qualities do the ones that pick up stuff have, and those that don't? What are they lacking?
Well, one of the things that really helps is if they like to read.
Mm.
And not all of my students like reading. They just look at a book and they say, "Oh gosh, why?" So
That's most
for
people
those
hate reading.
students, for those students, my approach could seem like, "Oh man, we're gonna read in Spanish again," Luckily, even the students that don't love reading, when I've spoken to them, they have said to me, "Yeah, look, Señora Susana, I don't enjoy reading, but I do recognize that it has made my Spanish better." So even though it might not be the most fun thing in the world to read out loud in every class like we do, the students do recognize, and luckily they're old enough to notice that it does impact their language learning in a positive way.
Mm.
The
So,
students that I struggle with the most are the students that have a reading difficulty because of the way their brain is wired. For example, students that are dyslexic. For them, it's really difficult because it becomes um, it's hard for them to read. Period. Right? To decode the written text into the verbal output is just it's just something that it's hard for them in English and it's hard for them in Spanish. They mix up the letters, they forget the way the letters sound. So for those students that have dyslexia, I do struggle and they struggle and it's hard. So what I have them do instead, it's not ideal, but I think it eases also their anxiety a little bit because these type of students are not the ones that like reading out loud in front of other people.
of course, they can't do it.
So
It's shame. It's
yeah,
too much pressure.
and they can, yes, it's a lot of pressure, everyone's listening and it's just not fair. So what I offer to those students is that they have the text read to them in an audio format, and I have them pause it and try to repeat it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
If the sentence is too long, it's going to be hard. But if the sentences are shorter, or maybe I have them pause it after a couple of words, then that's how they can practice with their pronunciation. But it is a bit more challenging for the students that have dyslexia.
Yeah. Okay. So we're trying to look at the qualities of the students, the people who learn the language well, and those who don't. So one of the qualities you mentioned is the kids who pick up your material are those who are interested in it, who really like reading, for example. They enjoy the process.
Yeah.
They enjoy learning. And then, of course, so you have some kids who are have learning disabilities, and so it's hard for them
Yeah.
to use the particular method of reading. Okay. Are there any other traits that you find in your students who do really well? They learn like what you teach them at really exceptionally well.
Well, this is where the so-called soft skills are very important, right?
Okay.
Because the students that are applied, that take notes, that I say a word and they repeat it to themselves, those students tend to do better than the students that come to class and they forgot where their notebook is. They don't have a pencil. You know, you're trying to show them a word or whatever, and they're looking at something else, or they're talking to their friends. So a lot of it has to do with maturity levels as well. You know, if it has to be mature enough to be able to say, okay, I'm gonna sit, I'm gonna focus. And I guess it's related to maturity, but it could also be related to other things. You know, maybe it's what they eat, and they had too much sugar, so they can't focus because they're all like super energized, and you know, they're a bit scattered.
Correct. Yeah, and it also seems that what you're mentioning there is also just some students are serious and others are not. That also, because the ones you're talking about, the student who comes to class with a pencil ready, they have their book in order, they did their homework.
Yeah.
They really want to know and learn what you have to teach. So those are like more serious, at least not serious as human beings, but serious about Spanish.
They want to get better. They genuinely want to improve. They have an intrinsic motivation for learning the language and getting better at it. Well, and other students that I have are just there because, you know, it's another class and they really just want to go and play football. So they're just counting the hours for the class to be over so that they can go and do something else. So the mindset has also a big influence on the learning.
Oh yeah, I think it's huge, the mindset. For example, let's say, based on my own thinking upon just language learning and just learning of any kind, the basis of learning seems to me to be correcting mistakes. Basically, if someone has improved or learned something, it means they've corrected a mistake they had before. So if someone is, let's say, blocked towards correction, they don't like being told that they're wrong, then that's also like a killer mindset. Like, have you heard of fixed versus growth mindset? Right. So typically there's some people who are fragile and they feel like I think we all feel this to some degree, where when someone criticizes you, actually they criticize your idea or just what you said. Like you said "señor," they say no, you don't say "señor," you say "señor." Okay, but there's a bit of a feeling that you're personally attacked. Like, like, oh, I'm wrong. I'm kind of, you know what I mean? It's like the ego kind of.
Yeah, there's also techniques that as teachers, at least as language teachers, we learn to do a correction in a softer way. So instead of interrupting the student or saying, no, that's wrong, you know, it's, for example, let's say that the student read a sentence. I always wait until they finish. I don't like interrupting them. Once they finish the sentence, I say, okay, let's go back. You read that really well, you know, good job on your pronunciation. There's one word that I want us to practice. Look at this word here. This word starts with the letter E. Can you say it again? And maybe the student had started saying you know, when they first read the word. So try again, remembering that that first sound is E. So more often than not, the student, the second time they try it, because of that little help, they are able to say the word correctly. So then I say, yeah, perfect. Or
Yes.
another method that I use, strategy that I use is, let's say that the student pronounced idea, okay? So I go back to the word and I say, all right, Modja, how do we say this word in Spanish? Is it idea or is it idea?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, it's idea. Good, right, perfect, nice job, you know?
Yes.
So
Okay.
just
So you try to soften your feedback, make sure
right,
it triggers the kids as little as possible. They don't feel
exactly.
personally attacked. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so obviously this means that if someone is trying to pick to select a teacher, a language teacher, maybe on a teacher on italki or wherever, it's smarter to pick a teacher who gives feedback well, right? Or at least a teacher who doesn't trigger you.
Well, but I mean, some people like it, you know, some people like the tough coach. The coach says like, no, that's not how you do it again, you know? And
Actually, I
to
think
some degree,
that tough coach is only liked in movies. I'm yet to find someone who likes it. Do you know anybody who
yeah,
likes
I
being yelled
guess.
at? It's just
No,
like
not
if
really.
you had
But
like
you're right,
yeah,
in the movies.
it makes great movies. It's more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the yelling coach. Actually, I heard about that. There's like coaches who yell a lot uh,
Yeah.
in movies, but the best coaches,
Mm-hmm.
like in basketball and football, don't even talk or talk very little when they
Yeah.
when they run practices. But I mean, you're not going to make a movie about a coach who just sits quietly and observes the players, you know, and
I
talks like
suppose the movie wouldn't be so interesting.
no, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Unfortunately, we get a lot of crazy notions from movies. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Anyways,
true. That's true.
yeah. Ah, Susana, our
Or
time has
another
up.
way that
Yeah.
that the correction happens is when you repeat what the student just said, but in a correct way, you know? For example, me llamo es Tom, instead of saying me llamo Tom or mi nombre es Tom.
Tom.
So when they say a sentence that is grammatically incorrect, the teacher could say it back to them without correcting them, but just
Yes.
saying it correctly, you know?
Yes.
So
Hmm. Okay.
just
So
the
I
thing
do
is
have,
that,
yeah.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I do have a question for you on this topic, because, for example, the kids you teach are lucky to have you as a teacher because you're able to give them feedback softly in a way that doesn't trigger their emotions. Now, sometimes when you're adult, you don't have the luxury necessarily. For example, I have various German exchange partners. They teach me German and they
Mm-hmm.
give me a lot of feedback.
Okay.
And there's one particular guy I had difficulty with because he didn't do any of, he just, sometimes it give feedback in a harsh way, you know? He's not trying to be harsh, but you
Yeah.
take it as a harsh thing.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
but his feedback was very good. So as an adult, I had to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to take the feedback. So my question is, what does one do if you have, if let's say someone is giving you feedback, but it's not being given to you, it's triggering you, it's making you angry or, you know, upset or making you feel inferior, but it's just feedback that's been given to you. How does one develop the ability to kind of hear the feedback without taking it personally?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the first thing, right? It's not taking it personally. It's not an attack on who you are as a person, or it doesn't have anything to do with your intelligence or your ability. It's just the way that the person gives feedback. You know, you could just put it on them and say, wow, they're kind of harsh, you know, as opposed to, oh man, I suck. Not because, just not to let yourself be defeated by another person's opinion of how you are pronouncing or how you're constructing your sentences. And if it's really getting to you, then easy, just find somebody else that can give you a different type of feedback.
Yes.
There's lots of people on the planet.
Yes. So
So,
you,
but it's important to find what works for you.
absolutely. So you're saying that basically how well you speak a language is not like a measure of your intelligence. Because, I mean, many people
Not at
believe
all,
that
no.
if you learn something well, you're smart. If you don't learn something well, you're dumb.
Well, I mean, there's lots of things to learn, you know. Maybe you're not great at languages, but you can play the guitar like nobody else can. Or maybe you're really good at building something, or there's just different ways of being smart and showing your intelligence. Language learning is just one of them.
Yes, yes, correct. That makes sense. The one is that, I guess one way to see it is not speaking, not, let's say if someone has spent 5 years learning a language and they're still at intermediate level, they may start feeling like they're stupid. But you're saying they're not, maybe they're just good at other things.
Right.
And yeah, that's definitely
Or
true.
maybe they, or maybe the methods that they have been using haven't been the best ones, you know. Maybe they haven't really exposed themselves to, once you're an intermediate, then you should be seeking out more opportunities to speak it, because definitely speaking the language is one of the fastest ways to learn it. Since you are just putting yourself out there, you know, you don't have a script anymore. You have to be attuned to what the other person is saying and be able to respond immediately without think time too much. So speaking is definitely difficult, but if you're not seeking those opportunities to speak it, then you might just continue being at an intermediate level for a long time.
Yeah, right. So this is definitely another aspect I really agree with here. It's the way I view it is, everything in life there's a way to do it. Like if you want to cook a meal, there's a recipe, a set of principles. If you follow them, no matter who you are, you get the meal. If you don't, it doesn't matter if you're the president, the meal is not coming. You didn't follow the correct principles. Right. And so if someone is stuck at intermediate, I mean, the way I usually think about it is, if you're stuck at intermediate or at a certain level, it means that you're not obeying the principles to go beyond that level. Nothing to do with whether you're intelligent or not. Even if you are intelligent, if you didn't follow the principles, you'll be stuck there. And
yeah,
that's how I usually think about it. But our time, I think we've actually run out of time. We got a bit of interruption, but yes, and it went by really fast, right?
it did.
Yeah.
I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you, Modja.
Yeah, thank you very much, Señora Susana, for this great conversation. It's going to be very helpful to the community for sure. And yes, I will put the name of the channel, Reading in Spanish with Señora Susana. This is a channel I recommend that you check out, especially if you're learning Spanish. Definitely check it out, because you're very focused on correct pronunciation. Yes.
Yeah, if you want to
have a lot
improve
of
your
great ideas.
pronunciation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Correct. Oh, you said you love my pronunciation in Spanish. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes. And thank you very much for the viewers watching this. So don't forget that every Monday at 8 a.m. Central African time, I publish a video, and it's designed to help you go from intermediate to advanced in your target language. If you have any questions for me, any criticisms for me, encouragement, whatever it is, I want to hear it. Please send me an email, polyglotprinciples@gmail.com. That's going to be in the description of this video. And my goal is to have 3,000 plus subscribers by next year, August. So if you have any ideas how to do that, I want to hear them. Right. So anything you think I should improve on, I want to hear it. All right. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, hit the bell notification so you can get more of these videos. And make sure to go to Susana's channel and subscribe there as well. Thank you very much. And yep, see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Until next time. Ciao.
Ciao. All right.